Welcome, everyone, to the Virginia Science Festival. Good afternoon. My name is Phyllis Newbill, and I direct the Virginia Tech Science Festival, among other things, here at Virginia Tech. First thing I want to let you know is that we are filming this presentation. So there's a 360 camera right here, so it's actually filming the whole room. So if you can see that camera, it can see you. So to our friends online, hello. So glad you're here as well. Everybody wave to our friends online. Look at this right here and wave. Okay, good. There's our friends online. So glad you all are here as well. And this will exist afterwards, so you can go back and watch it and watch in 360 as well. Immediately after the presentation, we'll send everyone out to continue their conversations in the lobby. We do have an evaluation program for those who are under 18, so we have some questions for you. The Virginia Tech Science Festival is a large event that goes on all fall this year with a number of field trips and online meetups as well. It's taken a lot of collaboration across the university to make that happen. And I'm sort of thanking different organizations that are helpful with that each hour. So I'd like to thank the College of Science and the Career and Professional Education, Continuing and Professional Education office at Virginia Tech. They're very helpful in making this thing happen today and throughout the fall. So this hour, so excited about this one. Our topic is the scoop on honeybee poop. And we're just excited that we get to put poop right there in the title. That's the best thing. So Emma Buren is with us, and Emma is a student at Virginia Tech, and she'll tell you a little bit more about herself. And she is in a Center for Communicating Science program, and I encourage you all to check that out. That's one of our partners as well. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Emma. Wait a minute, I'm going to do one more thing first, then I'm going to turn it over to Emma. If you have questions during the presentation, if you'll hold on to those until the end, we've got a section of time that's for questions. If you have a question, just raise your hand. I'll come to you, and I'll hold the mic and for you so that you can ask the question. That way our friends online can hear the questions as well. If you're online, I hope that you'll use the questions box or questions button and send something to us if you have a question. And I will get it right here and we'll send it to Emma. So with that, I will turn it over to Emma Buren for the scoop on honeybee poop.
All right, thanks, Phyllis. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the scoop on honeybee poop. Before we get talking about honeybee poop, I wanted to introduce myself. So, hi, I'm Emma. I'm a microbiologist, and I'm also a graduate student here at Virginia Tech. So what that means is that I study the tiny microorganisms, the bacteria, and the viruses that live inside. Is the mic okay? I'll keep going. I'm a loud talker. It's okay. I study the bacteria and viruses that live inside honeybees and inside other animals like humans and frogs. So here is a picture of me at the beehives. And these beehives are in Blacksburg, so they're pretty nearby. You can't see the bacteria that I study in these photos because they're really small, but they are there. And this is me hanging out with the bees. But before I came to Virginia Tech to be a graduate student, I also used to study frog microbiology. And so I used to study the bacteria that lived on frogs. And so I have a quick question for you guys, just as a show of hands. How many of you think the bacteria that live on frogs might have, or how many of you think the bacteria that live on frogs would be the same as the bacteria that live on bees? Okay, so one hand for yes, and then two hands for yes. Three hands for yes, all right. And how many of you guys think those bacteria might be different? So the bacteria that live on bees are different than the bacteria that live on frogs. All right, so you got a split. And that's okay, that's totally fair, because how would you know without looking, right? And so that's one of the jobs of a microbiologist, is to try and figure out what type of bacteria live and what they're doing where. And what you might be surprised to find is that different animals have different bacteria living on their bodies. And so cats have different bacteria than dogs, and humans have different bacteria than trees, and trees have different bacteria than snakes. And what's really exciting about this is that every animal and every plant has what we call their microbiome. And a microbiome means their tiny community of microorganisms. So micro meaning tiny, right? And biome meaning habitat. So like environment. So they're tiny habitat, and these are these bacteria that live on them. And so we all have our own microbiomes, And these microbiomes are our special bacteria and viruses that live on our bodies that do special things for us. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. So I work in the Belden lab, which is run by Dr. Lisa Belden up in the corner here. And these are my lab mates, my wonderful lab mates. And what the Belden lab is interested in doing is we want to know what bacteria are living in animals and plants and what they're doing on those animals and plants. So how they're interacting with each other, the other bacteria, and also how they're interacting with those animals and plants. All right. So I've got a question for you guys. I'll take a couple answers. What's in poop that a microbiologist might care about? Right.
I think that it has bacteria.
Yeah.
I know it has bacteria, but I know you might study different types.
No, you're exactly right. Poop has lots and lots of bacteria. Go ahead, and what else might be in poop?
They might be interested because they could find stuff out about like what the bees do.
Yeah, exactly. So when you're a microbiologist and you want to know what the bees are up to, you can look in their poop and you can see what they've been eating, and you can also see exactly what type of bacteria are in there. And so what you can do, right, if you're curious about what's in a bee's gut, you can look at their gut, right? Or much easier, you can look at their poop, right? So from a microbiology standpoint, our favorite thing in the whole world is poop. We love it. It's so much fun to look at. All right. So yes, there's lots and lots of bacteria in poop. It's a gold mine for microbiologists like me. So I want to ask you guys another question. What do you guys think bacteria are doing in the gut before they end up in poop? So what are they doing inside before they come outside?
Digesting the food?
Yeah, that's a great answer. Any other ideas?
Maybe they're helping like the bee stay healthy.
Wow, yeah, you guys have been reading up on your microbiome studies. Great work.
It's helping the bee like get it down into its butt.
Yes, they are helping with that. They are definitely helping get the food down into the butt. And so, exactly, the bacteria are doing a lot of things inside the honeybee gut. So they're helping digest food, they're keeping the animal healthy, they're doing all sorts of really important things. And so that's what I am really interested in. So now you guys have been really good answering all of my questions. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to show you guys some honeybee poop. So if we could switch over to the Elmo camera. Let's see. Oops, that's not the honeybee poop, that's the gut. But I didn't plan for that. Let's see if I can pull this down. So this is some honeybee poop. Maybe I zoom out a little bit. Other way, yes. Other way. There it goes. All right. Oh.
Everyone who's ever used a microscope has had this fun.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm much better with microscopes than I am with cameras. But so this is some honeybee poop, and what you guys might notice first of all is that it's bright yellow. And that might make sense, right? Honeybees, they're yellow, right? So it makes sense that their poop is yellow. And they eat things that are yellow, right? So it makes a lot of sense that all of their food is yellow, so their poop is yellow too. And what's really exciting about their poop is, like I mentioned, it is super full of lots and lots of bacteria. And so when we have these poop samples, there are millions and millions of bacteria in there right now, probably billions of bacteria just in that little itty bitty tiny sample just in this right here at the bottom of this tube. There are more bacteria than probably, grains of sand at your favorite beach that you can think of. Maybe not. A lot. There's a lot of bacteria in there. All right. And so I was just curious, how many of you guys were surprised to find out that honeybees poop? Yeah? I was surprised when I came here to work, when I used to work on frogs. I knew frogs pooped, but I came to work on honeybees, and I was like, what do you mean they poop? I read Everybody Poops growing up, but I guess I didn't take the message to heart. So before we get to the gut, I want to go ahead and introduce you to the mouth of the honeybee. So this is probably one of the most important parts of the honeybee, right? And I'll answer your question in just a minute, don't worry. But the mouth of the honeybee, right, is where all of the food goes. It also is where our first bacteria lives that I want to introduce you to. So, Lactobacillus kunki. Can everyone say that? This is the Latin name for our bacteria. It's a really famous bacteria, in honeybees at least. Lactobacillus kunki. You guys want to say it with me? Lactobacillus kunki. It's kind of fun to say. And what you guys might recognize is the name lactobacillus. You may have heard that before. It's in yogurt. So we actually eat lactobacillus, and it's in our guts too. And just like how we use lactobacillus in our yogurt to make yogurt, or we also use it sometimes to make things like bread, the honeybees, they have lactobacillus on their tongues. And when they when they bring their pollen back to the hive, a little bit of their saliva and their lactobacillus mixes with that pollen, and they seal it up in the hive. And then what happens is over time, that pollen kind of turns into a new type of food. It's almost like the bacteria cooks the food a little bit, and it turns it into what we call bee bread. And this type of bread is really, or it's not really bread, but it's this type of crunchy pollen that is really good for the bees. It has a lot of protein. And so the bees actually use their bacteria in order to kind of cook and make a nutritious meal for themselves. So that's our first bacteria we want to meet. And now for our second bacteria, we're going to meet midgut. So we can go ahead and move back to the Elmo camera. And I think we've got our midgut here now down below. Perfect. So let's see if I can zoom in. All right. I've got a laser pointer here. So we've got our midgut. This is this guy right here, up here. And this midgut is kind of where digestion really gets going. And so there's not a whole lot of bacteria that live in here, but what does live in here helps to break down pollen. And so pollen is really tough, and it's hard for bees to break it down. It's super sturdy. It's got a strong coat. And so some bacteria, like Gillamelia apicola, and you want to try saying that one? It's kind of a tongue twister. Gillamelia apicola. What it does is it actually kind of punches holes in the pollen for the bee, so that then there's sugar inside that pollen that can get released. And then that honeybee can say, oh, thank you, perfect, I would love some sugar. And so that works kind of like a hammer on the pollen. And so Gillamelia apicola lives right here inside the honeybee gut. All right, so now what we're gonna do, you don't need to change it, it's all right. I'm just keeping myself on track. Is we're gonna move on to the ilium. So this is the ilium right here. This connects the midgut, which we just looked at, to the rectum, which we'll talk about next. And the ilium here has my favorite bacteria, which is Freshella pereira. And Freshella pereira is my favorite bacteria because it does something really neat. There's lots of bacteria in the honeybee gut, and they all work to help keep the honeybee healthy. But Freshella pereira actually teaches the honeybee immune system how to fight. And so what Freshella pereira does is it acts kind of like a pretend pathogen or a germ that the honeybee system can learn how to fight against and say, hey, what are you doing here? And Freshella pereira won't really hurt the honeybee, but it teaches that immune system what to do when it sees a dangerous germ. And so honeybees with Freshella pereira in the ilium here tend to be healthier and have better immune systems than honeybees without Freshella pereira. So it's really important that they have this bacteria so that they can be healthy and fight off really strong, or fight off dangerous disease, right? I think that's really neat. And finally, what we've got is our rectum. And this rectum is where the poop is, right? So you can see it's quite big. There's quite a lot of poop in this rectum. And what's really exciting about the rectum is this is where all of the bacteria eventually ends up, right? So as the food is moving through the digestive tract, everything ends up here eventually before it leaves the honeybee. And what we see in the rectum is we see a lot of Bifidobacterium asteroides. Now, Bifidobacterium is another bacteria that we have in our guts as well, not asteroides, but another species, another type of Bifidobacterium. And what's really cool about Bifidobacterium is, like Gillamelia apicola up here in the midgut, it helps release sugar, and so it looks at really rare forms of sugar, and it finds the kind that the honeybee can't use itself, and it turns those really rare forms of sugar that the honeybee doesn't know how to use, and it eats it, and then it releases kind of leftovers that the honeybee can say, oh, thanks, I can use these leftovers now. And so it's kind of almost like here, you can have my scraps. These will help you out. And what's also really neat about Bifidobacterium here in the hindgut is that when a honeybee has a lot of Bifidobacterium, it actually, we think, and we're not totally sure on this yet, but we think when it has a lot of this, studies have shown that it actually encourages the honeybee to its body to start releasing hormones. So do you guys know what hormones are? They're little chemical signals in your body that release cues for the rest of your body to know to do things. So when Bifidobacterium is in a honeybee's body, we see hormones release that tell the bee things like, hey, you're not a very young bee anymore. It's time to leave the hive and go look for food for the rest of the hive. And so we think that Bifidobacterium actually has something to do with encouraging the bee to age and go on to the next stage in its life cycle, which is to look for food for the hive. So I think that's really neat. All right, so this is the honeybee gut, and these are just 3 of my favorite bacteria from them. There are others, but I think they're very cool. Well, 4 if we count Lactobacillus kunki. I think we can go back to my slide now. Right, so together, these 4 types of bacteria and many others, they work together to help the honeybee eat, break down pollen, and digest sugar. And what they also do is they keep the honeybee healthy and they help it grow, right, and move through its life stages. And what my lab is really interested in, right, is finding out what these bacteria are doing, but we're also really curious about what happens when something changes that. So for example, what happens when viruses attack? So when you hear viruses, you might think of something like COVID or something else scary, but when I think of viruses, I often think of viruses that infect bacteria. And that might be surprising to you because we normally think of viruses that infect animals and make them sick. But for Shella pereira, Guillamelia apicola, Lactobacillus kunki, they can all be infected with viruses as well. And those viruses can make the bacteria sick, or sometimes those viruses can actually help the bacteria, just like those bacteria are helping the honeybees. And so one thing that our lab investigates is how those viruses actually interact with the bacteria and how that helps or hurts the honeybee. Another thing that our lab looks at is how antibiotics interact with the honeybee gut. So if you've ever been really sick with a bacteria that was hurting you, you might have taken antibiotics. And those are really important, right? Because they kill the bad bacteria. But the downside of that is they also might accidentally kill some of your good bacteria. So you should definitely take your antibiotics if your doctor gives them to you. Very, very important. But we wonder what happens when you accidentally hurt some of your good bacteria as a side effect of having to take care of that really nasty bug that was really, really hurting you. And so that's another thing that our lab looks at in the honeybee gut. And finally, of course, we want to know what happens when the honeybee is sick, right? What happens when it's not feeling so good, when it has a disease? How does that change the bacteria living in the gut? And so those are some of the questions our lab tries to answer. So how does our lab study honeybee gut bacteria? And so what we do is we like to go out to the hives and we pick up a bunch of honeybees and we take them back to our lab and we put them in what we call an incubator. This is basically just a fridge, but it's warm. And so it's nice and toasty and it feels like the inside of a hive. And we give the bees honey, or we give the bees sugar to eat, and we give them bacteria. And we give them antibiotics and things like that, and we see what happens to the bacteria that live inside them. Now, how do we study that bacteria, right? We go back to the poop. And so I have a video here of us taking a poop sample. And unfortunately, it's not great quality, so I'm going to try to show it to you guys. But what it is it's my lab mate Casey holding a bee up into a tube, just like these ones I have here. And she is gently squeezing a bee, and it's okay, it's not hurt. But she's gently squeezing it right there until just a little bit of yellow poop comes out right at the end. And I don't know if you guys saw that. I'll play it one more time. Unfortunately, the video quality, not great. It was taken on my phone, and I have very shaky hands. But you can see a little bit of just yellow poop coming out right there. And so that's how we study honeybees in the lab. And why do we do this, right? Because this all sounds really fun, or at least I think it sounds fun, but it maybe doesn't seem so important, right? And there's a couple reasons. So to help honeybees stay healthy, there are pollinators, they're important for our agriculture, right? We want to have food to eat, fresh vegetables, fresh fruit, but also to understand our own gut bacteria, right? Because just like honeybees, we also have gut bacteria that are helping us too. And so if we can learn what the honeybee bacteria are doing in the honeybee guts, maybe we can learn a little bit about what our gut bacteria are doing as well, and then we can help both the honeybees and us too. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and start taking some questions about bees, bacteria, poop, science in general, anything you guys want to know. Right. Yeah.
Let me come to you. Wait a minute.
Why are the bees' eyes so big?
That's a great question. I don't know. You know, I have a question for you though. Do you know that bees have 3 eyes?
No.
Yeah, that was a game changer for me too. I don't know why the eyes are so big. I know that they use their eyes to see light, so they don't see like us, and so their eyes are really different. Instead of having eyes like we do with just one pupil, they have big, kind of compound eyes, and they see mostly just lights, I think. I'm not sure. I'm not a bee eye optometrist. But I will say they actually have a third eye. So they've got a big eye, right, and another big eye right there, and then they actually have a third eye right here that is just almost a light sensor. So it doesn't see anything but just light, so just light and dark. So I don't have an answer for you, but I have another question, and I hope that's fun for you.
Why do bees eat honey instead of something else? And how long is their tongue?
How long is their tongue? Their tongue is really long. We can go back to this photo. I don't know if you see. That's their tongue. I don't know if you can also see. That's their tongue too. That's their tongue, and that's their tongue. So they actually have a tongue that kind of splits. It's almost like a bunch of different fingers, like it's like tentacles. And their tongue is really long because it helps them reach into flowers, right, and pull out nectar. The reason they eat honey, I imagine, is because it tastes good, for one. But also, I would bet, because it has a lot of sugar, right? And it's something that they can make and store in the hive for a really long time. So you only ever see honeybees in the spring and the summer, right? They probably started, you haven't seen any in a while, or at least you're stopping to see them now that it's gotten really cold. And that's because once it's really cold, they stay in the hive all winter. And they don't hibernate completely. So they're still awake in there. And so they need a food source, right? And so if you have that honey in your kitchen cupboard that has been in there for like 10 years, right? That honey never goes bad. And so the bees are able to eat that honey all winter long. And they have a food source that they can kind of just munch on the whole time. So that's why they eat honey, is it's a really good source of sugar for them. Mm-hmm.
Why do bees need a stinger?
Why do bees need a stinger? That's a good question. You know, I ask that question too sometimes when I get stung. So yeah, they need the stinger because they want to protect the hive. And so only the queen bee, so that's the queen bee, she's like the mom of the hive. She's the only one that lays baby bees and is the one that makes all of the bees children. And so all of the other bees, all of the worker bees you see, they don't have any kids. And so their job is just to protect the hive, right? And so they have a stinger because that's their number one job. And so the best way to protect the hive is to have a stinger and sting people. And so that's why they have a stinger, is so that they can protect the hive. And the reason they need to protect the hive is because that honey is so gosh darn delicious, right? So everybody wants it. Bears want it, skunks want it, people want it. And so when everyone's trying to take your honey, you got to have a stinger so you can scare them away. Mm-hmm.
Does the queen bee have a stinger?
Does the queen bee have a stinger? Oh my gosh. I don't know. You're stumping me today. Does the queen bee have a stinger? I should know that. Oh no.
I don't know either.
Don't tell my advisor. She's going to ask me that at my next meeting. She's going to be like, hey, Emma, does a queen bee have a stinger? I don't know. So I know that sometimes the stinger is actually also an evolutionary tool. So bees' stingers are also sometimes associated with how they lay eggs. So some bees that don't sting still have stinger-like things that they use to lay eggs. So I imagine the queen bee has something, but I don't know if it functions like a stinger. She definitely has something that she uses to lay eggs, but I don't know if it can sting. I would imagine probably not, because if she stings, she might die, and it would be really bad if the queen bee died. That would be not good because once a bee stings, right, they die. So ideally, I would imagine no, but I don't actually know. You've got a lot of good stumper questions. You should look into science.
How come after bees sting, they die?
Right. So we looked at the gut today, right? And that's because the stinger is actually attached to the end of the gut. And so if you guys are wondering how I get these, it's kind of gruesome. Everybody ready? I pull the stinger of the bee and I just pull the whole gut out really slowly. And so that's why when bees sting you, they die. So I'm pretty sure I'm going to go with the queen does not have a stinger. At least it doesn't work like a stinger. Or she never uses it. Yeah. But that's why they die when they sting you, because they accidentally pull their guts out. So ideally, they don't want to sting you. So that's why you should always try to be really respectful to bees, because they really don't want to sting you either, right? It's not a good day for them if they have to sting you. Mm-hmm.
But it's worth it to protect the hive, right?
Yeah, you got to protect the honey.
Yeah. What other questions do we have? I think I wrote one down. Oh, you had something about antibiotics.
Yeah.
And I had a question. You said that different things happen when bees get antibiotics or if they're exposed to them. How do they get antibiotics?
Oh, yeah, great question. We actually use antibiotics a lot in the hive. So there is a handful of bacterial diseases that make honeybees sick, just like they make humans sick. Different bacteria, but ones that make them sick. And so there are a handful that we treat hives with all of the time with antibiotics because we don't want our hives sick and they don't make honey. They don't pollinate well when they're sick. And so it's really common practice to actually treat, at least in America, hives with antibiotics. And so we want to know kind of what happens to them, right, when we're constantly giving them antibiotics. How is that changing that? I know in other countries, some locations have actually banned the use of antibiotics. We have one of the scientist groups in our lab is from the UK, and she's always joking about it because they don't use antibiotics in their honey there. But so that's what we use that for. There's a couple pathogens. One of them is Penobacillus larvae, and another is Melissococcus plutonius, and they both cause American and European foul brood, which kills the bees when they're babies. So they're like little wormy grubs, and they turn into just kind of mucus and goop. It's very gross.
That does sound gross. Turning into goop. One more question here. Mm-hmm. Two more questions.
So you said we could ask a question just about random science, right?
Yeah, you could, I don't know about bees' eyes, so I may not know about random science, but you can try.
Why do people say compasses don't point straight north?
I actually know the answer to that. I think. Well, you might want to double check with an earth scientist. But I'm pretty sure that's because, I thought I knew the answer, and now
I'm ready to help.
You got it, Phyllis?
Ready.
Take
Yeah.
over.
So the compass will point to magnetic north, which is where the Earth's magnetic field. So Earth is tilted a little bit, and so Earth's magnetic field kind of moves around a little bit because the magnet itself, that's the inside of the Earth, moves a little bit, and the axis of the Earth stays still. And so the axis is in one point all the time, but that magnetic one moves around. And so the compass always points to the magnetic one, which is kind of near the real axis, but it's not right next to it. Cool.
I should have gone for it.
I studied geology.
How do you know if a honeybee's sick?
It's a good question. I have a photo that I kept just in case. Right. So here's a photo. This is of a hive. So I don't think I mentioned this, but honeybees, when they use the bathroom, they don't like to use the bathroom inside the hive. They always leave the hive to go to the bathroom. But when they're sick, right, they have upset stomachs. If you've ever had to run to the bathroom, accidents can happen. And this happens with honeybees too. And so one way to know if a honeybee is sick is if the outside of their hive starts getting really messy. If you start seeing a lot of poop on their hive, you know that something is wrong because you know that they're not making it very far away from the hive before they have to go. And so that is one way that we know that our honeybees have upset stomachs.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we are at time, so I want to thank you, Emma, so much for this super enlightening. Did you all know this much about poop? About honeybee poop for sure? That's amazing. Thank you so much, Emma.
Yeah, no problem, guys. Love to talk about it.
What I'm going to encourage, thank you to those who are watching online. I'm going to encourage everyone in the room to move to the lobby for your continued conversation and also for an evaluation for our guests under 18. And also be sure, guests, everybody actually, be sure that you get a goodie bag. There's a Science Festival sticker and also a robot that you can put together in there. A word to the grown-ups that are with the younger people. The robots are complicated and they have many tiny parts. You may want to take them home before you start pulling them apart. Just word to the wise there. Thank you again for being here. We'll be back at 2 o'clock for our next session, and we'll see you then.